All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, depending what part of the world you are joining us from. I am Alex Faust, your host of Conversations at the Edge. I'm very excited to be joined today by Rebekah Thomas. We have something a little bit different for you in store today. So very excited to get going. As always, if you have questions for Rebekah, please type them into the chat and we will get to them towards the end of our conversation today. But if you're not familiar with Rebekah, if you haven't had the pleasure of meeting her yet, she is our very own VP of marketing. And the reason why we brought Rebekah to Conversations to the Edge today is because the landscape for lead generation and marketing continues to change drastically. And it's more important than ever to have an expert on your team who's really staying ahead of the trends and making sure that you can grow your customer base quickly and at a price point that you can afford. So we asked Rebekah, who is a demand generation and performance marketing expert, to help our community, you, our Edge members, break down what's changing and what's staying the same in the world of marketing. So, Rebekah, welcome to the other side of the camera today. And where are you joining us from?
So I am where am I? Della Plain, Virginia, which is a tiny little town outside of the DC Loop. I'm here hanging out with my father and his wife for a while.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have you live. And, we want to jump right in. As I said in the intro, the landscape is changing once again. The role of Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok are shifting daily. So what do you see as the biggest opportunity for marketers today?
So I'm going to say something that back in my agency days frustrated my clients very much. And I'm going to tell you that it depends. It depends for Growth Institute. It depends for your business. It just kind of depends. And the thing that's going to tell you more than anything else, more than any landscape chart or article that you read, is going to tell you where you should be advertising or where you should be, spending your marketing effort. It is knowing your audience. So, not just their demographic, but like what their pain points are and where they go to get their information and what they are looking for, in terms of solving their biggest problems. And, that might be an association of some kind, or it may be TikTok, or it may be, the Washington Post, it may be LinkedIn. So, social is an important channel, but it's not the only channel. And while it is the one that's making the most headlines right now, right, it may not necessarily be where your highest level of impact marketing opportunities are. So my first piece of advice is to think less about the platform and more about who you're trying to talk to and figuring out where they're going to be and go be there. And that's a totally different mix if you're a tech startup or if you're an executive education firm like us, or if you are a manufacturer, for example. But the other thing I will say is that there are some foundations that I've found are just super important, no matter who you are. So, trendy platforms aside, search engine marketing is one of my favorite. It's kind of where a lot of my background comes from in performance marketing. I was a search marketer before, from way back in my career. And so I still think that search engine marketing, both organic and also having a complementary paid strategy, is essential to any business. And again, that goes back to being there when people are looking for you, right? And search engines are kind of magical that way. I think that having a killer content strategy and a really diverse content strategy is important. It can be a very heavy lift, but is incredibly important, again, to answer those questions and to be there when people are looking for the problem that you solve or the value that you provide. And then I also think that retargeting is incredibly important. So as people are pre-qualifying themselves by coming to your site, coming to your blog, coming to a product page, et cetera, retargeting both from a display perspective and also from a social perspective. Even sometimes within the search marketing landscape, you can retarget people who have already pre-qualified themselves as interested in you, and have that always on way to bring them back and keep you top of mind. So it depends.
That's great. Well, I appreciate you breaking that down. And if we maybe take a step back and, you as a performance marketing expert, can we talk a little bit about like, what is performance marketing as a whole? How do you define that? And if you're looking to invest or, make it performance marketing part of your strategy, what kind of person are you looking for to kind of lead that in your organization?
So, person that you're looking for, that is a great question. And I think that the first thing you want to look for is somebody who's super curious and someone who can take data and synthesize it and be able to tell a story with it, or at least draw some hypotheses out of the data that you can turn into campaigns. And it's those curious people who are going to be the ones who find you those innovative channels that may not be the big flashy ones, but they're the ones that really carry the impact with your audience. And it's also those people who are going to bring the ideas that really make the difference in a campaign. So, for example, we collect survey data in our webinars, and one thing that we try to do is mine those webinar surveys for insights into what our audience is thinking or has questions about or struggling with, or what those pain points are. And then the other side of the person that's going to be a great performance marketing fit is someone who can, kind of a right brain left brain thing, someone who can turn those insights and that data into creative ways to build buyers journeys, and someone who understands that yes, an ad click is important, but then how do we nurture that lead? How do we make sure that we're working correctly with sales? And so someone who understands and thinks about the customer experience from start to finish is a really important asset. It's not just about your Facebook ad engagement rates or what have you. It's about that entire experience that you create for your customers when they come in, through whatever campaign that you've created. So I would say, a great performance marketer is both, sort of logical and numbers and database, and also can pull out that creative side of them when they need to.
So have you found universal KPIs that are critical to be understanding from a performance marketing mindset?
So I think about marketing KPIs in two buckets, and how the way that they work together are what we call, the levers that you can pull to optimize. And so I think about the volumes that I need to drive as that first bucket, and I think about the efficiencies with which we drive them as the second bucket, right? So I need to drive 1,000 MQLs this month, and in order to do that, I need to convert traffic at I need to convert leads to MQLs at a 20%. And is that realistic or not? And so, I think about KPIs in those two buckets. And with every campaign that I build, I do two things. First, I build the buyer's journey that I think is going to be the most impactful way to drive someone from a prospect or someone just coming onto my website and just filling out their first form, all the way to being ready to talk to sales, or all the way to being ready to purchase, if that's more your purchase journey. And what I'll do is, once I've figured out what those touch points are, I'll actually put those into a bottom-up model. And I start with the revenue that I need to drive, the sales that are going to drive that revenue, how many MQLs I need to drive to get those sales up, and all the way. And then you think about the efficiencies that you need to do in order to get those in order to drive those volumes, and you start to be able to tell whether or not those efficiencies are realistic or not, right? And so you start to get your KPIs. I've got 1,000 MQLs, but I can't hit that 20%, or I'm not hitting it yet. So what am I going to do in between that lead and that MQL to warm it up more, or warm up the score, or get them to take that next step that turns them into an MQL? And really understanding that entire journey from, the first click on an ad, or the first click on your organic listing in Google, all the way down to whether or not they become ready to talk to a sales rep, or they become ready to purchase online, can be, mapped out. And so I think that's how I think about KPIs. And another note that I made for myself to mention here is that, within every channel that you market within, they have their own specialized KPIs. So in email, you might be looking at, open rates and click-through rates, and those are important and a contributing factor to the funnel. In ads, you might be looking at your click-through rate and your conversion rate when they hit the landing page, and those are important as well. But from a CEO perspective and a top line perspective, I think understanding exactly what you need marketing to do, and having those KPIs built at the sort of funnel level is more effective than trying to look at every KPI within every channel that your marketing team is managing, or that your marketing people are managing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. And just to clarify, for folks who might not be familiar with the terminology, MQL
Ah,
means marketing qualified lead. So I don't know if
that's right.
maybe it's worthwhile talking about the stages in which we think of leads and how we
Sure.
talk about them, at least at Growth Institute.
Sure. So, I first learned about, acronyms like marketing is full of acronyms, right? I first learned about acronyms like MQL and SQL when I was at my previous company, and we were thinking through all of our marketing automation and sales funnel and how marketing and sales kind of work together to drive things. And so, Serious Decisions is a large sort of consulting organization, research organization that enterprise level businesses work a lot with to consult on how exactly to tweak their marketing automation funnels and their sales cycles, et cetera. And I believe that it was Serious Decisions that actually coined these types of acronyms. But at the highest level, of course, you've got your lead and a lead, or you can even go a little further up and think about subscribers, for example. A subscriber is someone who just interacts with your newsletter, or you only have their email address, for example. And then you drive them through some marketing activity and they become a lead, which means they've, downloaded a piece of information or a white paper or, a lead magnet or something, and they've taken a few additional steps. And then you get into the marketing qualified lead stage, which, means that either you have they've taken some key activities that you find and that your sales team finds warrants some attention from sales, right? There's a little bit of intent behind some of these activities. Or in some cases, also, if you're working with CRM systems like HubSpot or Salesforce, you can put scoring in place to help you get people or drive people to that MQL stage. Then you get down into the sales qualified stage, and that's typically where marketing not lets go of the lead. That's not right, but hands the lead to sales, and they start to work them together. So a sales qualified lead would be something that sales says, like, yes, these guys are ready for me to talk to, or yes, these guys fit the profile of who we want to go sell to. And they kind of take it from there. And then, of course, that leads to opportunity. And there within opportunity and deal stages, there could be additional acronyms used. But that's where all of that came from. And I'll try to stay away from the jargon moving forward.
So when we think about the lead moving from a marketing lead into when the sales team is going to start taking over, what remains, in your opinion, remains the role of marketing to that lead once a salesperson has started interacting?
Yeah, so I think that's a really important question. And again, I'm going to say the infuriating words that it depends. There are some cases where sales might want to take that lead and have marketing stop touching them, because a lot of times marketing communications are more general, they're not as personalized. The sales team starts to get to know the lead, and they really want to be talking to that person and kind of gatekeeping the communication with that person, after they become a sales qualified lead. But I think in more cases than not, marketing can continue to, and they continue to warm the lead up and nurture the lead by continuing to offer valuable content that has to do with the product that they're interested in, for example, continuing to invite them to webinars and events that keep your brand top of mind. I think there are valuable ways that marketing and sales can kind of work together to continue to move that person through the buyer's journey. And I think another key factor is how quick the sales process is. So if sales gets a lead and they close it in a couple of days, like, I think marketing should step aside. But if you're talking about the longer sales cycles where you're trying to educate on a very complex topic, or that person says, I'm ready to buy, but not quite yet, marketing maintains a responsibility to keep the brand and the product and the relationship top of mind along with sales.
Great. Thank you. One of the things that I believe gets to be kind of complicated for organizations is understanding, like, when to be testing and how often to be optimizing. What are your thoughts there? And are there minimums to ensure, like, significance to testing whatever you're testing throughout the funnel?
Yes. So I think of all of our marketing campaigns as kind of living, breathing beasts. And I don't even just mean campaigns. I mean, your marketing engine overall is this living thing that you can never just set and forget. And so at any given time, you could be optimizing a landing page or a page on your website or an ad or an image or a color, or, there are just endless things that you can pay attention to. And it's enough to drive any marketer insane, and definitely to turn off anybody who's like, I don't get marketing at all. But what I found is that back to that KPI question, if you understand as a leader, like what marketing's KPIs are, and like know those and have set up the campaigns, or know your marketing team has set up the campaigns to meet those, then understanding those guiding models can really help keep the testing focused and disciplined, and not allow it to get kind of out of hand, and not let the sort of marketing optimization frenzy overload take over, which can definitely happen. And the other thing I've found that really works to kind of help keep the sanity there is, as you're developing your campaign, often I think you come up with a few different concepts, right? You're like, this pain point could work, and this is how we could address it, or this is how we could message it. But then there are a few other hypotheses about how you might like go about talking about these things. And so when you're developing your ad copy, don't develop one ad, develop 5. And as soon as you know how that like initial hypothesis is working, you can, and if it is, great. If it's not, you have something to like swap out. Same with landing pages. Don't just develop one set of imagery. You could develop a few. You could have a few different banners, and those banners could look the same and have different words, or have different design with the same words. There are definitely ways to kind of structure your testing so that it doesn't drive you nuts, and it doesn't drive all your partner teams who are developing all your assets for you and, kind of acting on the fly, nuts as well. But I guess the crux of that in summary is like, you have to be testing and optimizing all the time. And there are ways that can get very out of hand, and also very counterproductive. And there are ways that you can really structure it to make the most of it.
Great. Thank you. And I want to ask a question from one of the audience members who's asked here.
Great.
So if anybody else does have questions, feel free to type them into the chat or the Q&A. But Rick is asking, how do you know if your messaging is connecting with your audience? How do you determine if there might be better messaging out there than your current hero messaging?
That's such a great question. And I think the answer is you watch how people are engaging with your marketing assets. So if you have missed the boat, then nobody is going to download your white paper, or nobody is going to click on your ad. If you've, kind of gotten it right, but not really, then you're going to see engagement rates, but you're not going to see a lot of follow through. If you've knocked it out of the park, people are going to go through the buyer's journey that you've designed, and people are going to actually take action and want to know more. And so I think, particularly you're asking about your brand platform. There are lots of ways that you can structure your brand platform, and a lot of companies change them all the time, because again, we're optimizing all the time. But I think that you can tell how people are resonating with whether or not they're engaging. And I think that's I would use data to see how they're engaging.
Great. Thank you. You talked, in the intro, we talked about the importance a little bit of staying on top of trends. So I'm curious how much time you're spending kind of like analyzing the market and understanding things externally versus just focusing on what's going on inside.
Yeah. So the answer to that question is not nearly enough time. I would love to be spending more time, spying on my competitors, or watching the industry, looking at trends, et cetera. I think that's very important. I think it can also be a little paralyzing, though. The quote that keeps coming to me every time I think of questions like this is, comparison is the thief of joy, right? And we want our brands to be, that's totally a self-help quote. It's not marketing related at all, but I think it applies. You want to go be yourself. I think Kai-Hen Krippendorf talked about that in Outthink the Competition, how understanding your market is important and your marketing dynamics is important, but you don't have to walk into a competitive situation with a complete dictionary knowledge of all of the data going on in your market to stay ahead and to do things creatively. And sometimes it even stalls you from doing things creatively, because you're trying to just keep up with them, or figure out what they're doing right that you can mimic. I think the other important thing, though, often because it's called market research, people think that market research sits with the marketing team. And while I think that market research in terms of understanding your audience is incredibly important and does sit with the marketing team, and it is our responsibility, looking at the market should be something that's done at the leadership level, so that you don't have marketing off thinking one thing and product off, developing something else. And, the two things don't marry up. I think that like really watching your market, understanding your industry has to be it has to result in a cohesive strategy that scales down across all departments and not just the marketing team. So in summary, not even nearly enough, but I'd also like to do it more in partnership with my other leaders as well.
That's great. Thank you. Where do you find new ideas for marketing? Where do you get inspired to come up with innovative marketing practices?
Yeah. So I think at Growth Institute, we're super lucky to live or to work in an environment where we're kind of expected to learn new things and to have new ideas and to, even fail at those new ideas sometimes, not often, but sometimes. And so that's kind of I guess, element that I bring to my job every day. Like, what can we do a little bit differently? And it kind of always has been. Back in my agency days, one of the coolest ways that we came up with new ideas was actually hearing from a lot of the vendors that were doing the innovation in the space. So we would get, people coming to us and telling us all about at the time, how the ad exchanges were changing everything. And all of a sudden you could buy things like TV and radio via ad exchange and, measure it just like display. Those kinds of things were always so exciting to me. And I think now I get more of my ideas from, publications. So some of my favorites are the Digiday newsletter. The B2B Marketing Zone is awesome. If you have HubSpot and have access to HubSpot University, I'd never taken any of their courses before I got to Growth Institute, but I'm loving a lot of their marketing stuff. And really just kind of following thought leaders. I've even taken a few courses over the last year of being at Growth Institute. One very recently was just really, really creative and wonderful. It was all about how to build amazing lead magnets through Marissa Murgatroyd and her team. So, I think it's just, again, about staying curious. And as a marketer, a lot of us are just curious by nature. I think it's one of the traits of the job. But there are definitely so many, experts out there, pieces of information out there, and as long as you're letting yourself have time to think and play, and not just staying in the weeds all the time, there's no shortage of new ideas.
Great. And I'm curious, like maybe not in a giant corporation, but in a small, mid-sized organization, like many of our community members are running. What do you see as the role for the marketing leader in the actual execution of the marketing?
Mm-hmm.
How often should they kind of be in the weeds with their teams to kind of understand and feel out for themselves what's happening and where to make pivots and adjustments?
Yeah, I think it's so incredibly important for marketers at any level to remember and not forget how to execute. I think that it's really important, to your point, Alex, to be able to jump in and help when jumping in and helping is needed. And I think it's also really important to just know on any given day, like what your team is going through based on what's being asked of them. I think it's really important to, understand all of the steps and all of the assets that are needing to be created and all of the, tiny details and checkboxes that need to be checked in order to execute a campaign seamlessly from start to finish. And, leaders who forget the level of detail that goes into pulling a marketing campaign off are the leaders who, I think get a little out of touch with their team sometimes. But I think that not all teams, as to your point, have the luxury of having leaders who are just strategy and just execution. And I think that you have to find the balance for yourself. And I think the one thing I would say is that, depending on your team, depending on the makeup, depending on, what their skill sets are, just making sure that you're using your employees like gifts and passions more than you're not. There's always going to be some like crappy parts of the job. Nobody likes reporting. Nobody likes budgeting. Nobody likes filling out the Asana calendars. These things just have to get done. But I think for marketers, maybe in particular, the creative piece and the like being able to work on the parts of the business that you're particularly excited about is incredibly important. And so just making sure that you're allowing your employees the flexibility to do that at the same time that they're getting the work done is incredibly important to finding that balance. And so did that answer your question?
Yes. We have another pretty cool question from audience member. Sean is asking, do you see social media advertising as being a viable channel moving forward? The current political landscape shows how easy it is to game the algorithms to get your content placed. Is the data we receive from Facebook campaigns actually good data?
Yeah. So the answer to your question is yes. I still see social as an important channel. Less and less Facebook. I don't know what they're doing, changing themselves to Meta and going after the metaverse and like what that's going to mean to the overall platform. I think Facebook, the way that we know it, is becoming less and less powerful when it comes to getting it's just more busy. You're right. The data is just not there. It's harder and harder, particularly on the B2B side, to get any kind of quality targeting out of Facebook. It's just hard to Facebook at the moment. But there are other social channels out there that are really trying to be the opposite of Facebook. I use LinkedIn as an example. I've been a B2B marketer for most of my career, and so LinkedIn I think has always been an important part of the media mixes that I've put together. We're really seeing the power of YouTube. If we hadn't already, I think, and with Facebook kind of moving away, YouTube is retaking some market share from just like power of content and user generated content perspective. And I think of YouTube as a social channel. I'm not sure if everybody does. That's where it sits in my brain category. But yeah, so social, yes. Facebook, maybe not as much. And again, I would just remind you that you need to be where your customers are or where your ideal customers are. And if that's in social, go for it. If it's not so much, then it doesn't need to be, I think, a big part of your marketing effort.
Thank you. What do you see as being the biggest threats to performance marketing today? And what are mistakes that leaders should avoid making at all costs?
So there are two big ones that come directly to mind. And I'm sure that there are more, but these are the two that really come directly to mind. And that's people who think, okay, I built a campaign, I'm going to set it and forget it because the algorithm's going to like optimize it for me. And that's not the case. That's not how it works. So setting and forgetting things like your search engine marketing campaigns or even your social media advertising campaigns is not a good idea. You'll never get what you want out of them, and you'll just waste your dollars. And I think the other one, and this can be harder, it's even hard for us at Growth Institute, to be honest, is bad measurement. When you set your KPIs and you give dollars to drive those KPIs, you need to make sure that you can see that those dollars are doing what you meant for them to be doing. And if you have a really disconnected tech stack, or if you are trying to drive to a KPI that's not as digitally monitorable, that can be really, really hard to do. And I would just encourage everybody that that performance marketing is in its essence trackable. And so making sure that you can actually track and see very clearly what your marketing efforts are generating, if not necessarily immediately in ROI, because depending on your sales cycle, that might be a little bit of a longer wait. That you can see what they're doing in terms of driving leads, warming those leads up for you, getting them ready for sales, whatever those KPIs are for you.
That's great. Thank you. So as we wrap up with only about a minute left, any final words of advice or recommendations for our community when it comes to building out or improving their performance marketing stack?
I would just say have fun. Marketing is fun. It's innovative. It should be fun. And I think, sometimes you can get buried in the data. You can get buried in, kind of what's working and what's not working. And I think the campaigns that have worked the best for me have always been the campaigns where I've had the most fun putting them together. And I think it's also what sets yourself apart. Mike Michalowicz just wrote a book that I've been reading through called Get Different. It's a great book, and it has some really great tools along with it. I'll give Mike a little plug there because I'm really enjoying the book. But he says, marketing doesn't have to be big, complex. It needs to be simple, and it needs to be fun, and it needs to set you apart. And so I just think putting the fun back into your marketing is important if it's not already there.
Awesome. Well, Rebekah, thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks for
Sure.
joining the community, and thank you to the community for joining and asking great questions. We look forward to seeing you all again next week.
Thanks,
Take
everyone.
care, everyone.
Bye-bye.